Blood on the Promised Land. 1500 AD, 1984 AD. Swimming in the sea of their thoughts, he was diving into them and wandering around, holding some of their thoughts in his long-clawed hand, and looking at them from behind his frightening white mask, smiling and feeling reassured. You saw him from a distance, not knowing who he was or how he swam in the sea of their thoughts like that. Then you soon recognized him. It was the Jewish devil Mestima. He was swimming in the sea of the thoughts of a new Christian sect, a sect that suddenly appeared in Europe after the Jews were expelled from there. Mestima was swimming in the sea of the thoughts of the Protestant sect. The Jews are the children of God and His chosen ones, and the Christians are strangers, and the strangers must be content to be like dogs that eat the crumbs that fall from the Master's table. Martin Luther. He found this idea floating in the sea of their thoughts, an idea that caught the attention of the Jewish devil, an idea expressed by Martin Luther, the founder of the entire Protestant sect, the priest who hated the quasi-divine authority of the Pope, hated the selling of indulgences that guaranteed people salvation from hell and plots in heaven, hated several other matters and opposed them publicly and passionately. In his doctrine, he sought closeness to the Jews and opposed their persecution, expulsion from countries, and treatment as eternal sinners and killers of Christ. Leave the gospel because it is distorted. The only correct book is the Jewish Torah and nothing else. And as for the Talmud, we should not burn it with such cruelty. Martin Luther. Another idea he held in his hand and scrutinized. An idea that placed the Jewish Torah in the position of the gospel in this new Christian sect. Christians accused him. The traditional Catholics accused him of being a hidden Jew. After a while, this man's ideas changed to produce something somewhat strange. Jews are creatures that must be gotten rid of immediately. Disgusting worms, cunning and cursed forever. We must take all their books and burn them. We must expel them all from our country. Martin Luther. Mestima looked at the idea in amazement. Wasn't the man just recently loving and close to the Jews? While Mestima was pondering, the serpent called to him with a call that made him understand that although this man's ideas had become opposed to the Jews, they were also Zionist at the same time. Mestima began to swim, searching for those Zionist ideas in the sea of the Protestant mindset, until he found them written in glowing red amidst all the other ideas. We must not hinder the Jews from going to Palestine. Rather, we must give them everything they need for that journey. Because when the Jews manage to establish a state for themselves in Palestine, Jesus Christ will descend to save the world from evil. Martin Luther. This thought is the true birth of Zionism. It emerged before Herzl was born, even before Sabbatai Zevi was born. Mestima left Martin Luther's ideas and searched for the thoughts of another Protestant reformer who came after him, named Calvin. Calvin, another Protestant reformer who came after him. Usury is not forbidden but is permissible, and there is nothing wrong with it. Calvin. This idea contributed to facilitating all Jewish financial transactions and their economic control over all European countries. Facilitated Calvin passionately advocated Martin Luther's ideas. His ideas divided the Church and the people in England, leading to the outbreak of the English Revolution, which we had seen on the screen with Serpent before. The devil Mestima left the sea of Protestant ideas and flew out to the skies of Europe, which witnessed religious wars between the followers of the Protestant sect and the followers of the Old Catholic sect. These religious wars claimed many lives, and European countries were religiously divided, with some becoming purely Catholic like France, Italy, and Spain, while others became Protestant like Germany and England. During this war, Mestima watched the Protestants migrating from England across the ocean to America, thinking of their migration as a reenactment of the Holy Exodus. In the days when the Jews left Egypt after being enslaved by Pharaoh, Moses parted the sea and brought them to a desert land, the land of Sinai or the land of wandering. On the other hand, The Protestants fled their persecution in Europe to a new land of wandering, America. They liked this land and became the overwhelming majority there, making Protestantism the dominant sect in America. Mestima did not understand what this meant at the time. All he knew was that these Protestants had become a majority in the world and were supporters and advocates of the Jews returning to Palestine. Therefore, the biggest supportive countries would be England and America. He did not fully understand what this meant as he flew over Al-Aqsa Mosque, but time would eventually make it clear to him. The Jews had now begun migrating to Palestine by the thousands after the Committee of Union and Progress took over the Ottoman Empire. And there was a serpent crawling on the dome of the rock floor. Dome of the rock floor. In the quiet, his split tongue emerged from between his fangs, twitching greedily for something. It seemed that the serpent had reached his final destination and would accomplish it, just as he had completed all the previous stages. After Herzl's death, Mestima began flying over another man, Herzl's successor in the leadership of Zionism, Chaim Weizmann, a Jewish chemist. Lord Rothschild sent him to visit Palestine during the Jewish migration there. This man did cunning deeds that greatly pleased Mestima. Initially, he established a land development company in Jaffa, aimed at systematically buying land from the Palestinians. His largest deal was purchasing a vast piece of land owned by a Lebanese family in Europe. Weizmann began building Jewish colonies on the lands he successfully acquired, then established an armed group called the Hashomer Guard, armed Jews with a somewhat strange appearance, wearing the traditional white Arab keffiyeh on their heads and two crossed black straps on their chests. These guards protected the Jewish colonies. Weizmann also organized demonstrations in Palestine for the recognition of the Hebrew language. While Mestima was flying over the streets of Palestine, he saw a newspaper lying on the roadside. He looked at it. It was named Al-Carmel, and the main headline on the front page was a warning to all Arabs about the establishment of a Jewish state, as it would be a poisonous dagger in the side of the Arabs. Mestima smiled faintly and then flew away to another place. Suddenly, the entire world was shaken. World War I had begun. Britain, France, Russia, and Italy allied against a single country, Germany. The Ottoman Empire had no connection to this European war, but the Committee of Union and Progress convinced the nominal caliph to join the war on Germany's side. Indeed, this is what happened. The turmoil intensified, and Mestima's cloak fluttered violently as he watched. The continuous losses of the Ottoman Empire in that war. Many countries slipped from the hands of Muslims, such as the Balkans, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, and the Caucasus. No Arab state was truly loyal to the Ottoman Empire anymore, and voices among the Arabs called for independence from that arrogant and weak Turkish entity. The Ottoman Empire was not in good condition. Not at all. Mestima truly had to cackle sarcastically as he finally watched what was called the Great Arab Revolt. It did not ignite at any time but flared up amid the Ottoman Empire's preoccupation with World War I. Mestima was very excited and flew directly to the heart of the event. The king of Hijaz and Sharif of Mecca, known as Sharif Hussein, was corresponding with the British ambassador in Egypt, known as McMahon. The British wanted the Arabs to join World War I alongside Britain against the Ottoman Empire, with a promise from Britain to recognize a large Arab state that would include the entire Arabian Peninsula, the Levant, and Iraq, and that Sharif Hussein would be the supreme caliph of this state, provided that it would not include Lebanon or Palestine. Sharif Hussein agreed, and the flames were ignited. While the Ottoman Empire was fighting the Russians, the British, the French, and the Italians on all fronts, it was suddenly stabbed in the back by an Arab dagger inscribed with the name Sharif Hussein. Mestima clapped his frightening hands at this magnificent betrayal. Mestima left the atmosphere of the Great Arab Revolt for other settings. A secret meeting between Britain and France, and the famous Sykes-Picot Agreement. It was chaired on the British side by Sykes, the British delegate for Near Eastern Affairs, and on the French side by Picot, the former French consul in Beirut. They agreed to divide the Ottoman cake between them, that is, to split the Arab countries between them after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Thus, Britain and France would each take their share. Britain would take Iraq and Jordan, and France would take Syria and Lebanon, while Palestine would remain under joint Allied control. Thus, Britain and France wanted to eat pieces of the Ottoman cake, even though they had promised to give those pieces to Sharif Hussein. But Mestima was wondering about the Jews' share of that delicious cake. He was wondering about Palestine. Suddenly, Sharif Hussein opened the morning newspaper to find news about this secret agreement between Britain and France. Although it was secret, the Russians leaked its details to the newspapers. The king of Hijaz was outraged and fumed, but a single conversation with the British reassured him. They told him not to believe the newspapers because they were just newspapers, claiming that no agreements had been made and that they stood by their initial promises and agreements. Thus, he was reassured, rested, and dreamt of becoming the king of the Arabs. Mestima was flying confidently over the situation of the Jews in Palestine. They were still buying land and building colonies. Finally, Jews, you have begun to own a part of Palestine after time has scattered you and the locals have humiliated you. Mestima heard echoes of a celebration in Britain, a grand celebration. He flew there within seconds. The Jews were celebrating. What were they celebrating? He saw the greatest wise men of Zion there, including Chaim Weizmann, Sykes, Lord Rothschild, and many others. They were celebrating a significant event. Days earlier, Britain had issued a promise to the Jews to establish an independent state for them in Palestine. A promise known as the Balfour Declaration. The clinking of wine glasses, the clapping of Jewish hands, and their smiles filled the air. Mestima's fluttering cloak and mask, which at that moment became a strange mixture of happiness and terror, overshadowed them. It wasn't an official promise, but a letter from British Foreign Secretary Balfour to Lord Rothschild. Mestima was eager to read its text. He flew to where the official letter was and opened it, reading it intently. It was as follows: The Foreign Office, on November 2nd, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I would be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours sincerely, Arthur James Balfour. To give land you do not own to a people who do not deserve it. This was the promise in brief. Weeks later, Mestima opened another secret letter, sent by the first Zionist to hold a ministerial position in Britain, addressed to the British Cabinet. The present time is not suitable for the establishment of an independent Jewish state. Therefore, Palestine should be placed under British control immediately after the war, to provide facilities for Jewish organizations to purchase land, establish colonies, and organize immigration. We must plant between 3 to 4 million European Jews among the Mohammedans. It was a wise letter and was executed to the letter. Britain requested France to amend the Sykes-Picot Agreement to give Palestine to Britain instead of it being under joint control. Under international control, the agreement was amended, and Britain began preparing its troops to militarily occupy Palestine. The Ottoman army in Palestine consisted of about 100,000 men, led by a member of the Committee of Union and Progress, a man named Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Orders came from the leadership of the Committee of Union and Progress for him to withdraw all his troops from Palestine and evacuate it completely. This is what Ataturk did. He withdrew with 100,000 men from Palestine. Mastema now hovered in the air, looking at a scene he had not seen in 7 centuries. A British army stretched beyond the reach of the human eye, like a long belt of soldiers extending from the horizon to the land of Palestine. The commander of this belt of humans was named General Allenby. Among this army was a highly trained Jewish legion, with faces Mastema did not initially recognize but whose names history remembers well. Among the faces in the Jewish legion was a man with baldness in the middle of his head, leaving islands of hair on either side, a man known to history as David Ben-Gurion. Another was Nehemiah Rabin, the father of Yitzhak Rabin, and others who would become notable figures later. General Allenby entered triumphantly among the people of Palestine, who had no idea where the Ottoman army had gone but were happy to welcome the British. For them, the British were the angels who had come from their country to help Palestine gain independence from the arrogant Turkish Ottoman state. This sentiment was not only held by the general populace but also by scholars, thinkers, and even the Grand Mufti of Palestine. Mastema heard General Allenby remarking on the situation, saying, "Today the Crusades have ended. The serpent was not present." He had suddenly left Palestine and headed to Russia, where the Tsarist government was severely persecuting the Jews. Once, a Jewish envoy went to the Russian Minister of Finance and proposed getting rid of all the Jews in his country by sending them to Palestine. The Russian replied, "I do prefer to get rid of the Jews, indeed, but not by sending them to Palestine, rather by drowning them in the Black Sea." It was necessary to move the large number of Jews in Russia to Palestine by any means possible. Serpent roamed around Russia until he incited a tremendous revolution. If we were to recount its events, we would need a separate book. Cunning and deceit led the Jews to rule Russia after they had been persecuted. Such deceit was known only in places where the Jewish serpent had slithered. The Russian Revolution took place and communism ruled Russia, with most of the new government being Jewish. Their first decision was to send the Jews to the Promised Land, to Palestine. Sharif Hussein raged and fumed, but Britain soothed and calmed him, putting him to sleep in his luxurious bed. They gave one of his sons the rule of Iraq and the other the rule of Jordan. Mastema began observing the lives of Jews in Palestine after the British occupation. Hebrew became an official language. They had their own power stations, a ministry of water and a ministry of public works. Jewish economists played their games, opened their companies, and employed Palestinians in them. However, after the large migration of Jews from Russia, the locals began to feel the danger, and ominous signs began to appear on Mastema's mask. On the other hand, a fake war was incited between the Ottoman Empire and Greece, creating a false hero in newspapers and magazines, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Ahmed Shawki praised him, saying, "God is the greatest, how marvelous the victory is. O Khalid of the Turks, renew the glory of Khalid of the Arabs." The cheers and adulation in the newspapers and magazines allowed this false hero to one day declare himself president of the Republic of Turkey, announcing the permanent end of the Ottoman Caliphate. As soon as he took over the rule of Turkey, Mastema was astonished by the number of bizarre actions he undertook. He completely removed the word Islam from Turkey's constitution, declaring it a secular state with no religion. He banned the wearing of the hijab for women, abolished the celebration of the 2 Islamic holidays, and prohibited Muslims from performing the Hajj pilgrimage for several years. He closed a large number of mosques, converted the Great Hagia Sophia Mosque into a church, banned the call to prayer in Arabic and mandated it be made in Turkish, abolished the position of the Mufti, executed 998 Muslim scholars who objected to these laws, forced mosque imams to wear European hats instead of Islamic turbans, completely abolished the Hijri calendar, equalized inheritance between males and females, dropped Mustafa from his name, retaining only Ataturk, and in the end, he requested that no funeral prayer be performed for him upon his death. While all these actions delighted Mastema's spirit, the astonishment on his mask lingered for a long time but eventually faded when Serpent suggested to him that Ataturk had been raised by a Jewish nanny. Ahmed Shawki composed a lengthy poem mourning Turkey and the fall of the Caliphate, attacking Ataturk, saying, "The prayer cried, and that was a mischievous fitna, with a tyrant of judgment and a brazen ruler. He uttered a myth and spoke heresy, and brought clear disbelief into the land. You can't deceive all the people all the time." The Mufti of Palestine and all the thinkers who had previously supported the British occupation of Palestine came out in numerous peaceful demonstrations in opposition. However, Mastema was flying over a different protest. A massive demonstration was carried out by Jews at the Western Wall, demanding the construction of the alleged temple, singing the anthem of hope, or as they call it, Hatikva, as long as the heart beats with a Jewish soul yearning, and forward towards the east, and eye looks towards Zion. Our hope is not yet lost, a hope of 2,000 years, to be a free nation in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. After the Friday prayer following that day, Mastema witnessed a terrible event in front of Al-Aqsa Mosque. A crowd of Muslims clashed with an equally large crowd of Jews. The British Army intervened between the two crowds, and their intervention involved opening fire on the unarmed Muslims, whose blood flowed in the courtyard of Al-Aqsa Mosque. Mastema's mask turned into a horrifying and dreadful sight, and he flew above everyone, heralding disaster. A major revolution erupted, marking the beginning of all subsequent violent events. It was the Al-Buraq uprising. The Palestinians destroyed 6 Jewish settlements. The uprising spread like cancer to every Palestinian city without exception. The global newspapers all reported about the barbaric Palestinian terrorists who committed the most heinous crimes against their peaceful Jewish brethren. 900 Palestinians were arrested, 3 of the most important among them were executed, and the uprising lasted a full year. Afterwards, Jewish immigration was reduced, and the Al-Buraq wall was considered entirely Islamic property, with no relation to the Jews. The Al-Buraq wall, now known as the Western Wall, is considered an exclusively Jewish property with no connection to Muslims. This wall borders the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the western side. It is the wall where the Prophet Muhammad tied his steed, Al-Buraq, before entering the mosque to pray with the prophets before his ascension to the heavens. Jews regard it as the last remaining wall of the temple and lament there over the destruction of the temple. It seemed that the uprising had somewhat calmed down after the severe repression that the British Army was skilled in, enjoyed, and relished. Mastema was flying over an intriguing place, a mosque in Haifa. You could hear the preacher's voice loudly echoing in the hearts of the people. Will you not fight a people who broke their oaths and determined to expel the messenger, and they attacked you first? Do you fear them? But Allah has more right that you should fear Him if you are truly believers. He repeated the last sentence 3 times, his voice trembling, warm, enthusiastic, and genuinely sorrowful. Then he said to them, "O people, I have taught you the matters of your religion until each one of you has become knowledgeable in it, and I have taught you the matters of your country until jihad has become obligatory upon you. Have I delivered, O Allah, bear witness, to jihad, O Muslims?" The mosque was filled with weeping and emotion. This was Is-ad-Din al-Qassam, an Azarite from Syria who led the people in his country against the French occupation. He then traveled to Palestine to lead the people against the British occupation. An hour after that sermon, the authorities began searching for him as they would for terrorists. However, at that moment, he had already taken his rifle and gone to the mountains. Mastema flew over those mountains to watch Is-ad-Din al-Qassam. With him were a group of his companions fighting against the English soldiers who uncovered their hiding place in the mountains. There were men from the Arab police standing alongside the English. Their commander shouted,
You are surrounded, O Az-al-Din.
You must surrender, for there is no way out for you with them, no way out for you with the English.
Az-al-Din replied,
No, we are in a position you have not yet known. We are in the position of jihad, and whoever goes out in this position should not surrender except to God. Mustim was following the exchange of gunfire passionately between the two sides in the mountains, but he started to fidget. The battle lasted for more than 2 hours, and suddenly, English planes invaded the sky. The planes bombed the side of the Mujahideen with English shells that claimed the souls of all the Mujahideen. And the soul of Az al-Din al-Qassam came out, the man who ignited the Great Palestine Revolution. Mustim's terrifying mask began to crack strangely, and black smoke emerged from the cracks. It was not just a revolution, it was a revolution and a strike, and perhaps this was the most intense revolution in the history of Palestine. The British forces suppressed it in every way until they reached the point of shelling and suspicious explosions of houses where they believed there were revolutionaries. The revolution lasted 3 full years, during which about 10,000 martyrdom operations were carried out, at a rate of 9 martyrdom operations per day. Cracks in the mask of Mustim began to increase. He flew over one of the mosques during the Eid prayer, and as soon as it was over and the people left, the British forces attacked them and arrested many of them. Mustim followed them until the British finished with them and closed them in places they called concentration camps, putting them inside and closing on them for 3 consecutive days. Mustim watched them urinate on themselves due to the absence of a place for them to urinate and their trembling, biting the ground out of hunger and thirst, and they wept for their condition, their humiliation, and their oppression, and the face of Mustim did not see the strongest expressions of mockery and hatred. Mustim felt that the atmosphere of the entire world was violently shaking. He remembered such shaking not too long ago, but this time the shaking was very violent. World War II. The Allies were still the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia, but this time America joined them. The other camp was Germany, and Japan joined it. It was the largest battle in the history of the earth, a battle in which 98 million people died. What was important for Mustim in that war was that huge waves of Jews fled from Germany and Europe, waves that all headed towards Palestine, waves claiming to be fleeing from Hitler's tyranny, which set up slaughterhouses and crematoria to exterminate Jews from the face of the earth. And these waves flowed on massive ships to dock at the ports of Palestine. And these people entered expecting each one of them to receive housing, food, and drink. And all their expectations were true, very true. Before World War II, the body that all the countries met in was called the League of Nations, the body that gave Britain a mandate to enter Palestine and occupy it. And after World War II, its name became the United Nations. And the United Nations decided to resolve the crisis of this Palestinian revolt by making Palestine under the rule of the United Nations, neither for Jews nor for Arabs. The Jews protested and rebelled against the United Nations, so it retracted its decision to think of another decision, to divide Palestine into 2 states, one Arab and the other Jewish, and it accelerated the implementation of this decision to expel the British from Palestine. In the meantime, the Jews had many military units. They had the Irgun unit, the Stern unit, the Haganah unit, and the Palmach unit. All of these were heavily armed military units, highly trained, although these units, all of them were helping the British in suppressing the Palestinian revolt. However, after the decision to expedite the expulsion of the British and the decision to prepare for the partition of Palestine, they decided to carry out terrorist operations against the British to hasten their exit from the country. And indeed, famous terrorist operations were carried out against members of the British Army. Bombings, assassinations, sabotage, and killings. until the leader of the Irgun unit named Munikim Begin was arrested and considered a terrorist. What amused Mostim was that this same man who was now imprisoned as a terrorist, after 30 years, he received the Nobel Peace Prize jointly with the Egyptian president Anwar Sadat. Britain instructed the Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa al-Nahas to establish an entity called the Arab League, comprising all Arab countries and expressing their opinion, with the condition that Palestine not be included in it, and the Arabs gathered in one league, and they excluded Palestine. Mostim was thinking a little. That league included 7 countries, 6 of them under British occupation, meaning that its real benefit was only to pass what Britain wanted in the name of the Arabs. And Mostim laughed again. Suddenly, Mostim with the cracked mask flew to the headquarters of the United Nations. There was a meeting of utmost importance. Mostim entered the meeting and the Jewish speaker said, "When we talk about a Jewish state, we do not envision any racist or sectarian state, but a state based on complete equality in rights for all its inhabitants, without discrimination in religion or race, and domination or subjugation." After Jews owned only 9% of the land of Palestine, but after this meeting, they owned half of the land of Palestine. This meeting was the meeting that announced the decision to partition Palestine into 2 states, half for the Arabs, and half for the Jews, and Jerusalem
To neither party. Instead, it should be an international zone. All Palestinians residing in the section allotted to the Jews were ordered to immediately leave their homes and move to the Palestinian section. The committee decided that the British would leave the country on May 15, 1948, 6 months later. The relocation of Palestinians from the territories designated for Jews began as per the decision. Mostim flew over the villages to follow the events of the relocation. The Haganah forces entered the village of Al-Aqsa, one of the key villages protecting Jerusalem, and expelled all its inhabitants. Mostim noticed a group of Palestinian fighters who appeared organized and armed. This group was the Holy Jihad Army, formed after Palestinians from all over the country decided to unite their resistance forces into one army. The leader of this army was a brave Palestinian fighter named Abdul Qadir al-Husseini, and Mostim saw him leading the fighters entering Al-Aqsa. A historical dialogue occurred between this man and the Arab League, in which he said, "I am going to liberate Al-Aqsa. I will storm and liberate it even if it costs me my life. We need you to supply us with the weapons you have stored. We have entrusted the matter of Palestine to a special military committee that will take care of it after the British leave on May 15th. If you wait until May 15th, you will need 10 times more than you need now. We do not support individual operations. We have more right to those stored weapons than the garbage bins you keep them in. History will accuse you of losing Palestine, and remember that history does not forgive anyone. I will die in Al-Aqsa before I see your negligence and collusion. Enough of your silly talk. We have the equipment and weapons, but we won't give them to you. We will wait until May 15th. Abd al-Qadir al-Husseini threw a piece of cord he was holding at them and said, "You are betraying Palestine. You want to kill us and slaughter us." Mostim saw him enter Al-Aqsa with a group of his soldiers. They were severely besieged by the Haganah forces, and at the end of the day, his body was found lying next to one of the houses in Al-Aqsa. Mostim flew over his body and looked at him mockingly. A piece of Mostim's chin fell off, revealing a dark, demonic feature not discernible. The next morning, Mostim was flying over a village near Al-Aqsa, a village called Deir Yassin. Suddenly, it was attacked by Irgun and Stern forces from 3 directions. At first, they used loudspeakers and spotlights, asking all residents to evacuate the village immediately. They were met with gunfire from within the village houses. Mostim flew to the source of the shots and found the village youths gathered, armed, and standing in front of their homes, ready to protect them with their lives. However, these shots provoked the Jewish gangs, who abandoned the spotlights and microphones, grabbed their machine guns, and attacked the village in large numbers like ants. The Jews committed the most horrific act in Deir Yassin since they first entered Palestine, led by Munakim, begin. Mostim, whose white mask's cracks had widened to the point of almost falling off, followed them. Mostim saw the soldiers unleashing bursts of fire from their machine guns, mowing down bodies one after another, killing children and women. He saw them throwing grenades into the houses, their homes, as the Jews continued their horrific acts. Families hid behind furniture, hoping for safety, only to be torn apart by explosions and gunfire. Mostim saw soldiers holding a man and his wife, slapping him until he fell to the ground, and then pinning his wife down, assaulting her like beasts. Their little daughter, unsure whether to look at her father taking his last breath or her mother screaming in agony, witnessed the horror. Another piece of Mostim's mask fell off as he continued to watch the massacre unfold in every corner of the village. The Jewish gangs lined up 20 young men against a wall, their faces and hands pressed against it, then unloaded their bullets into their bodies, causing them to collapse on top of each other. They cornered the village baker, who had lit the oven before dawn, preparing for the day's bread. After entering the village post-dawn, they surrounded him in his bakery, then threw him into his oven alive, burning him to death inside. At this point, Mostim's mask fell completely, revealing the darkness hiding behind it. No longer masked, his head appeared as a demonic skull with a mocking gaze characteristic of demonic skulls. On his forehead was carved the Star of David, and his cloak continued to flutter. His voice turned into a demonic scream, reminiscent of the roars of giant dinosaurs. He then flew to another scene where he saw a group of Jews seizing women and children, throwing them into a village well, pouring fuel over them and setting it ablaze. The fire erupted from the well's mouth, scattering sparks around, and forcing everyone to shield their faces. Through the flames, Mostim appeared as the quintessential Jewish demon. The massacre of Deir Yassin ended after 3 days, during which a third of the village's inhabitants were killed. The survivors fled to neighboring villages, causing a chain reaction of fear and flight among other villagers. The Palestinians began to flee from one village to another, seeking safety from the relentless onslaught. In front of Rachel, the door opened, and an elderly man appeared, surprised to see her in this condition. He helped her inside and quickly closed the door behind her. The girl seemed extremely exhausted and was beginning to lose consciousness due to the bleeding. As she entered, Mostim watched the scene from above, noting the worried expression on the old man's face as he treated Rachel's wound. After a few minutes, the man regained some composure and began asking her why she had come here. Rachel tried to speak but was too tired and simply pointed to the pocket of her jacket. The man pulled out a sealed letter and read it carefully. What caught Mostim's attention was the look of shock on the man's face after reading the letter. It was clear that the letter contained very important information. The man quickly started moving, gathering some papers and items from the house, and then left with Rachel to an unknown location. As Mostim watched from above, he felt something unsettling. This wasn't just another group of Zionist spies trying to infiltrate the Arab area. There was something bigger happening. He flew up into the sky, observing the situation from a broader perspective, trying to understand what was going on. Meanwhile, the situation in Jaffa was escalating. Moshe Dayan and his forces were preparing to attack the city, having devised a meticulous plan to subdue it and expel its residents as they had done in other towns. As they prepared, news of the impending attack spread among the Palestinians. People were in a state of panic and fear, trying to find a haven. During this time, Mostim watched, relishing the scenes of suffering and fear that gripped the city. As the hour of the attack approached, Jaffa was experiencing critical moments. Residents were trying to gather what they could carry and flee the city, while the Jewish forces were getting ready to strike. Amid this chaos, Rachel and her mysterious uncle were moving secretly, carrying with them information that could change the course of events. Rachel stood in front of the door, which revealed another beautiful girl inside. As soon as she saw Rachel, she rushed to hug her, asking what had happened to her, and then brought her inside. This other girl was a Palestinian named Muhiba Khorshid, a prominent Palestinian political activist. Despite Rachel being Jewish, She had a strong friendship with Mehiba because Rachel strongly opposed Zionism and its ideologies. It seemed that Rachel's proximity to Moshe Dayan had allowed her to learn about the Haganah's plan to storm Jaffa, and she had risked her life to come and warn Mehiba so that the people of Jaffa could prepare. Mastam's features looked very angry, as he considered Rachel's actions a betrayal. But what truly surprised him was what happened the next day. During the Israeli forces' invasion of Jaffa, Mastam watched in disbelief with his skeletal eyes. There was an armed group, a Palestinian women's armed brigade, led by Mehiba Khorshid, who looked like a legendary warrior wielding a machine gun, wearing a headscarf and semi-military attire, with a squad of armed women behind her. Mastam forgot about the rest of Jaffa as he watched this brigade that was fiercely fighting the Haganah. He was stunned to see Rachel Dayan leaving the house with a rifle in her hand, saving one of the brigade's women at the last moment. Rachel and Mehiba stood shoulder to shoulder in the field, one Muslim and the other Jewish, fighting against Zionist forces. They both demonstrated such bravery in the battle that they survived even after Jaffa was occupied and its people expelled. Rachel left the town alongside her friend Mehiba, wearing a headscarf as a disguise so her people would not recognize her. The day finally arrived when British forces began their long military march out of Palestine, reminiscent of the march they made when they first entered the land. They were leaving after having replaced one people with another, elevating one people and humiliating another. Just minutes after their departure, there was a Zionist celebration. David Ben-Gurion ascended the platform and began reading the Declaration of the Establishment of the State of Israel, or as they called it, the Declaration of Independence. Strangely, they had no real presence in the country to declare independence from. Mastam hovered directly over Ben-Gurion's head, standing proudly in the air with his arms crossed in a powerful stance, his robe casting a shadow over all the attendees of the celebration. He listened to Ben-Gurion's declaration. The Jewish people originated in the land of Palestine, where they established a sovereign state. They were expelled from it on a fateful day, but the Jewish people never forgot their hope of returning to their homeland while in exile. Therefore, the Jewish people began returning in their thousands to the Promised Land, the land from which they were anciently expelled. And now, in response to the call of the great late Theodor Herzl, the proponent of the Jewish state idea, we stand here today and declare our independence as a state with its language and army. The Nazi Holocaust, which recently befell the Jews and claimed the lives of millions of European Jews, has demonstrated to the world the necessity of resolving the Jewish people's problem of being without a homeland and independence. The United Nations has declared the establishment of an independent state for Jews on this land. Today, we announce the end of the British Mandate, and by our natural and historical right, we declare the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. This state is called Israel, and we appeal to the United Nations to accept the state of Israel into the family of nations. You must learn, my friend, that Jews are one thing and Zionists are another. Jews believe that the state of Israel is an affront to the mission of the Messiah. As for Zionism, it is one of the tribes of the Jews, an evil tribe. They began with Herzl, who drew his ideas from Sabbatai Zevi. Zionism is the most successful branch to emerge from Freemasonry, as anyone who reaches the 33rd degree enters officially into the 13th tribe of the children of Israel, the evil tribe. Don't think that Jews scattered around the world support Zionism. Some are vehemently opposed to it. The problem lies not with ordinary Jews who oppose the state of Israel, but with adherents of the Protestant doctrine that supports the Jews' takeover of Palestine. I speak at the level of the people, but of course, the rulers of all major countries support Israel and bless its steps. I promised earlier to tell you the reason they want to build the temple with such enthusiasm and have been striving for it throughout history. It all goes back to a promise in the Torah. God's promise to the Jews that in the end times, a man from their lineage will come down upon them. He will deliver them from their dispersion and rule the entire world with justice from the Holy Land in Palestine. Although God fulfilled his promise to them and sent them the prophet, Isa, Jesus, they denied him. When they saw him die on the cross before their eyes, they realized he was not the promised Messiah. Jews around the world are now awaiting the end of time for God to send down this promised Messiah, who is not Jesus but someone else entirely. In essence, they are just waiting. But after humans allied with demons, after a group of Jews emerged from humanity, the Knights Templar. Writing magic and satanic sciences beneath the sacred precincts of Jerusalem, everything flipped. Their ideas began to change. It's not true that we should wait for the Messiah, but rather we must strive with all our effort to make him descend to us. This endeavor involves the complete takeover of Palestine. The Crusader Wars ended, and the Ottoman Empire became a formidable force not to be trifled with. The task of Freemasonry to reach Palestine became extremely difficult. Jews were persecuted and expelled from all parts of the world at that time. The first step was for Jews to return to the country from which they were expelled, not just to return, but to control those countries through finance. They succeeded in this and ignited multiple revolutions in Europe, resulting in each country becoming subservient to the Jews and indebted to them. Then came the second step, the establishment of the great American nation filled with wealth. Although all American presidents and leaders were Freemasons, it was also necessary to convert the beliefs of the people to be sympathetic to the Jews. This happened when Freemasonry removed the Protestant doctrine that believed in the necessity of Jews taking over Palestine from its cloak. The third step was the downfall of the great Ottoman Empire and the introduction of Jews into Palestine, then establishing a state for them there. This was a tremendous success. After Jews owned half of Palestine in 1917, they began expanding over the years, changing the lands allocated to Arabs until they seized 91% of Palestine, leaving only 9% for the Arabs. This 9% is divided into two separate blocks, like islands in a sea of Jews. One block is a small block called the Gaza Strip, and the other block, larger than the first, is called the West Bank, which includes Jerusalem. Israel still changes Gaza from time to time and changes the West Bank to consume more land. There's nothing left for them now but to complete the takeover of the remaining part and demolish the Al-Aqsa Mosque. What you may not know is that they have dug many tunnels beneath the foundations of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. If a minor earthquake or heavy rain were to occur, a significant part of the mosque would collapse. You might ask me what we can do in the face of all these terrifying names. Freemasonry, Zionism. This is the most important question you've asked me since our sessions began. All these names, my friend, are just paper names, and not any paper, but rather the paper of the garbage that has no value. When we were one nation under one devoted leadership, we didn't need to do anything about such garbage. Perhaps you sensed this from Mastum's story. They used to kneel before us. What do all these scary names follow? They follow Lucifer. And what is this Lucifer? Satan. And only those who follow the creation of Satan are not ashamed to follow Satan himself, God. And that's how we were before until these people succeeded in dividing us. They divided us into a few dozen countries. Each country hates its neighbor. They planted nationalism among us, the Egyptian, the Saudi, the Gulf, the Moroccan. All of them have ingrained animosity towards each other's countries. The Egyptians aren't proud to be Saudi, and the Saudis aren't proud to become Moroccan. It's unknown to them that they're all originally Arabs, and there have been no nationalistic touches between them throughout their long history. All these nationalistic sentiments are newly planted and have no origin. What do? I won't call for impossible things, but I'll call for very ordinary things. So that we weigh ourselves among the nations, we must move in the opposite direction of what they want us to move towards. Firstly, unify your currency, just as Europe has done. Remove the borders between you just as Europe did. Let Arabs move within the Arab world without visas. They have also done this in Europe, despite their wars and conflicts throughout history. The two world wars were originally between European nations. Despite this, they did it. As for the Arabs, there are no historical conflicts between them, just nationalistic animosities. It's something that an Arab can hold in minutes and throw it out in the nearest trash can. What else? What about unifying the army? Does that seem impossible? Wasn't it unified 100 years ago? I won't dwell on the matter. I just want to open your mind so you understand what I want you to understand. Let's go back to our context. As for the Holocaust, which the Jews claim Hitler carried out against them, what they call annually Holocaust and commemorate annually, prosecuting anyone who denies its occurrence. Here I am saying it out loud. The Holocaust you claim happened is a lie you've adopted as a dirty excuse to make the world feel that you're a persecuted people and that you need land to contain you after all this persecution. You claimed that Hitler killed 93 million of you in the Holocaust, while your actual number in all of Europe was 8 million. You reduced this number to 6 million. The truth you're trying to hide is that the number of Jews in German prisons doesn't exceed 20,000, and half of them were found alive. As for what the Jews did in Palestine, what the Crusaders did in the First Crusade, and what the Americans did by annihilating millions of Native Americans and destroying Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear bombs, none of this has any value to them because they're simply non-Jewish people, animals, or as the Talmud says, goyim. And I'm truly amazed, especially concerning America. How can the bombing of 2 American towers be the epitome of terrorism while the bombing and annihilation of 2 entire cities with their men, women, children, and elderly not be terrorism? I'm talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course, and I remember how the Americans wrote their dedication to Toperson the bombs before dropping them. Anyone who mentions the Jews and their Holocaust with a word is prosecuted under the pretext of being anti-Semitic. Semitism is affiliation with Shem, the son of Noah. What's frustrating about the matter is that they use this as an excuse to forbid any criticism of them, while they are the first to criticize and defame others. The Arabs are descendants of Shem as well, along with many other nations, but they excluded all nations from their lineage and kept their lineage only for themselves, the Jews. I mentioned the United Nations in this story. There is something called veto power. 5 countries, America, Russia, Britain, China, and France, have the right to object to any decision made by the United Nations. If just one of these countries objects to a decision, its implementation is immediately halted, even if all the other countries in the world agree. America always uses this right to stop any decision against the State of Israel. By the way, all the countries in the world must be members of the United Nations, and if they refuse, actions will be taken against them. There is a saying from the great prophet Muhammad in which he says, "Nations will gather against you, just as people gather around a meal." When I see the round table of the United Nations and the representatives of the nations sitting on it, making decisions against the Arabs, I remember this saying more than anything else. Finally, I want to warn you very much about many clips and conversations published on the internet regarding Freemasonry. Those who publish them are the Freemasons themselves. In the past, the whole concern of Freemasonry was not to let information reach the people. But now, in our era, keeping information secret or hidden is no longer appropriate or possible due to the prevalence of media and the internet and the impossibility of controlling the spread of information. Therefore, the modern means of deception are what is called audacity, spreading many and large clips and floods of information, all superficial information that consumes minds and makes the viewer feel the absurdity of the whole matter, and that it is a sick person obsessed with conspiracy theory who set up the subject. Don't read about Freemasonry anywhere until you've read my book first. Then you'll know where to read. And don't worry whichever. Any information mentioned in this book that you attempt to verify, you'll find it to be true. You won't find me lying to you. A word from George Bush comes to mind. Let us not be deceived by those conspiracy theories, as they were designed only to alleviate the pain of the real terrorists. It's good he said this, as there's an accepted rule I want you to remember as you would your eyes. Don't believe something unless it's officially denied. If Bush hadn't said it, we wouldn't have believed it. I hope you understand me. If not, reread the sentence repeatedly. Sometimes they spread rumors that celebrities like Valina were killed by the Masons, even though they were ordinary people who died in ordinary ways like car accidents or illness. But their spread of these types of absurd videos makes people overlook what celebrities are truly silenced by the Masons. To avoid confusion, away from political leaders, the Masons kill other influential figures and personalities simply because these figures decided to swim against the tide. Among the most famous figures they've killed are Bob Marley, Michael Jackson, and Tupac, because each of them used singing as a means to convey a meaningful message to the people. And it's not a problem for the Masons that it's a meaningful message, but their problem is that it carries, in many folds, a direct attack on them personally and their goals. And each of the third musicians has a passionate audience in the millions. So, they must be silenced forever to keep the sleepers in their deep slumber. Now you understand that everything Freemasonry and Zionism have done was to build the Temple of Solomon to hasten the descent of the Messiah. But don't you find it somewhat strange that the goal of Freemasonry is religio, to have God send down the Messiah upon them? Yet, they don't acknowledge God. In fact, They burn him every year in the Bohemian Grove. Isn't God? Do they worship Lucifer? How does this align with the descent of the Messiah and the Torah's prophecy? Don't rush to answer, for you're about to know, and I'm about to die, leaving only 2 devils of the 7. Interestingly, the 6th devil isn't male but female. Let's take a look at the documents that will reveal this tale. We have 6 papers. 1. The first paper is the Internet worm paper, featuring a woman sitting in front of a computer from which a fierce green worm with a pyramid-shaped head and a single eye emerges. 2. The second paper is the Silicon City paper, depicting digitally photographed silicon chips. 3. The third paper is the computer security paper, showing a girl masked in black with black clothing, with what appears to be hoses coming out of her head, spreading all around her. 4. The fourth paper is the hacker's paper, with an image of a man sitting at a computer, laughing a malicious laugh reminiscent of the Joker's. 5. The fifth paper is the phone company's paper, featuring an employee in a phone company wearing 2 headphones connected to many wires, seemingly listening to subscribers' calls. These papers may seem somewhat strange as we discuss a female devil, but we must continue.